So when we were planning our sabbatical for about the past year, we were wavering back and forth about where to go. We knew it would be Israel, but we didn't know where in Israel. Greg and I had both spent a lot of time in Jerusalem, and we thought we should really try somewhere new. Maybe Jerusalem was also a bit too Haredi, too ultra-Orthodox. It was tense there. There were a lot of stabbings going on. But for a mix of personal and professional reasons, we decided it was going to be Jerusalem. And in hindsight, I can't believe we considered going anywhere else. It was the perfect place for our family and the best place for me to grow and to deepen as a rabbi. I'm so grateful to all of you, to Temple Shalom, for the opportunity to take a sabbatical leave. As rabbis, we are so fortunate to be part of this community that values our professional development in such a way that allows us to take time, 3 months away from the congregation, to grow and return enriched and inspired to be, I hope, an even better teacher and rabbi. I want especially to thank the professional staff of the shul for covering so much in my absence, especially Rabbi Dan, and by extension to Sharon and to Judah and Levi and Esty, who I know also were impacted by my absence, and I will be very glad to repay the effort when it is your turn. So my sabbatical was filled with incredible opportunities for learning. I got to be a student again, which was heavenly. I took 3 different classes while I was there, 2 at Pardes and 1 at Elul. Pardes might be more familiar to you. Some of you know it's a pluralistic, egalitarian yeshiva in Jerusalem that has roots both in Jerusalem and abroad. Most of my classmates were very young, post-university Americans. I had a wonderful chavruta, a wonderful study partner who was 22, right out of Yale. But there were also students there of different ages and from all over the world. I studied with students in my Gemara class of 10 people, with people from Paris, Mumbai, Toronto, London. It was amazing to just spend time immersed deep in the pages of Talmud again. One of my favorite subjects to teach as a rabbi is Talmud, which I teach with Kevin often. And I feel like I was able to refine and deepen my textual skills so much through this course. Even in my time in rabbinical school at HUC, I don't think we ever spent so much time on Talmud. I took many, many Talmud classes there, but they were shorter. Here in Israel, I got to spend 3 hours a day just looking into one page of Talmud. And I know that the insights that I gained from this immersion will bring so much to my own teaching here at the shul. I took a second class at Pardes on Kabbalat Shabbat, on the service welcoming Shabbat on Friday evenings, and it was taught by a wonderful teacher, a rabbi named Ruth Gon-Kagan, who is the rabbi of Nava Tehillah, which is the renewal congregation in Jerusalem. She's a brilliant teacher of Kabbalah, of Jewish spirituality and liturgy, but she also brought some wonderful insight into her process of leading tefillah in what is really, I think, probably the most innovative prayer setting in Jerusalem today. Nava Tehillah, her congregation, it meets monthly, actually in the basement of Kol HaNeshama. If you've been to Jerusalem, the largest Reform synagogue, Kol HaNeshama, they meet in their basement. And they bring about 12 of Jerusalem's best musicians to lead what is an incredibly joyful and spiritual Kabbalat Shabbat service. But they also do something interesting in that Nava Tehillah leads Kabbalat Shabbat every Friday afternoon at the Tachana Rishona. The Tachana Rishona is the first station. It is the old train station on the old train line that ran from Jerusalem to Yafo, to Jaffa. They've revitalized this station into an incredible gathering place with cafes, restaurants, musicians, and shops. And every Friday afternoon, they have on their central stage a Kabbalat Shabbat. This Nava Tehillah group comes and plays with their musicians, beautiful music, and Israelis of every stripe, from religious to secular, all along that spectrum, come to just welcome Shabbat, and it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I really look forward to integrating some of the insights that I learned from her class about Kabbalat Shabbat into our tefillah, and maybe even sharing some of the tunes that I learned from her with Cantor Tausig and bringing them to you. One of my interests in starting the sabbatical, that I shared with many of you before I left, was exploring the renaissance of Jewish learning that's going on in Israel from the secular community. Religious learning has a very long, of course, history within the religious community, but in Israel, the secular Israeli community has distanced itself from traditional Jewish texts. And today, there are many different institutions that are attempting to bring Jewish learning back to Israelis who wouldn't define themselves as religious, but to give people a familiarity and a sense of belonging in the corpus of our texts. So I had some really wonderful meetings with different leaders of these programs, and was able to enroll in one of these classes in Jerusalem at the organization called Elul, which is a Beit Midrash that uses traditional and modern texts to create dialogue and in a way that's relevant and current to our lives today. And I took a class that was about storytelling in the Jewish experience. It was taught by this wonderful teacher named Jackie Levy, who's actually a very well-known actor in Israel, who comes from a religious background, is very well-versed in traditional text. And he would bring different stories, different agadot from the Talmud, the Midrash, Chassidut, Hasidic stories, and weave in modern Jewish stories, folk tales, Jewish jokes, to help connect people to see how our modern Jewish story is totally layered upon these ancient texts. And it was really wonderful to have that experience as well. But I would say that it was beyond kind of the formal classroom hours in which I really grew and developed. Certainly the time that I was able to spend with my family was immensely restorative to me. We enrolled our kids in Israeli public schools, and I'm proud to say they did really very, very well. It was completely eye-opening to me in terms of the Israeli educational system, which is another sermon for another time. But I would say that having our family, and especially living in Jerusalem with children in school, allowed us to really feel a part of Jerusalem. Spending time with the other families of the school, organizing play dates, and being in sync with just the schedule of the school year, being part of everyday life was an incredible experience that allowed us to really just soak up daily life in Israel and specifically in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem, after we decided it would be the place we would spend our time, it was interesting to hear others' reactions to that decision. It's very, very notable that every Israeli we encountered who did not live in Jerusalem looked at us and said, "Are you crazy? Why would you live in Jerusalem?" And especially Israelis from Tel Aviv have a very strong aversion to Jerusalem. We don't go there. Whenever we would visit friends in Tel Aviv, we would invite them, "Please come to visit us in Jerusalem. We want to show you around. It's wonderful." But they never came. Not one. They were scared. They were worried about the stabbings. They asked us many times, "Aren't you nervous to walk around?" They felt alienated by the religiosity of Jerusalem. I have a friend who kept asking me, "But do you live near Haredim?" Yeah, but other people do. They didn't think that there was anything to do in Jerusalem. They would say that Tel Aviv is the only place with culture, with nightlife and fun. And there were a few times when my antennae were raised about the security situation, but by and large, we walked around Jerusalem feeling very safe. And what I really realized, in kind of contrast to my Tel Aviv friends' sense of Jerusalem, is that when you're in Jerusalem, you're very connected with the Arab population. People who seem from a distance to be such an other are your neighbors. You're shopping at the mall or at the supermarket with people of all backgrounds. The guy making your latte at Cafe Aroma, which is kind of the Israeli Starbucks, is very likely to be Arab. The woman seated next to you on the light rail. My kids got a virus at the exact same time and needed to be seen at a clinic on Shabbat. The entire staff of the clinic was Arab. The doctors, the nurses, the receptionists. And there was a flat screen TV in the hallway with a picture of a challah, and it said, Shabbat Shalom. That is Jerusalem. My Tel Aviv friends have very few encounters with the Arab population. So despite being really much more politically progressive than the Jerusalemites, they were the most frightened. Sometimes living together can cause tensions, but I truly think that therein lies the solution as well. It's hard to make peace with people that you don't know. There are other cities and towns, especially in the north of Israel, like Haifa, that are even more integrated between the Jewish and Arab populations. But I think that this kind of Jerusalem-Tel Aviv divide, this experience is significant, and I think one that we should explore further as we think about the Arab-Israeli conflict. I too, like my Tel Aviv friends, suspected that Jerusalem might feel religiously stifling. One of the remarkable coincidences of the timing of the sabbatical was that it allowed me to participate in the CCAR conference in Israel, and to see Rabbi Dan too. Every 7 years, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, our rabbinical association, holds its annual conference in Israel. And this year was the first year that the convention was split into two locations. The first half in Jerusalem, the second half in Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv, years past, had been a day trip, but this time it was three days, 3 nights. So much of Reform Judaism is blossoming outside of Jerusalem, and the conference really reflects that reality. It was terrific to experience Jewish progressive reform life outside of Jerusalem in new communities. I went to a beautiful Shabbat service in Holon, just outside of Tel Aviv, and I was able to spend some time and really develop a lovely friendship with Rabbi Stacy Blank, who is the rabbi of the Kilat Tzor Adasa, which is our new partner synagogue, which is just outside of Jerusalem. But what was really interesting is that as much as I was inspired by the growth of Reform Judaism outside of Jerusalem, I was very surprised to find that in reality, progressive Judaism, not just Reform, but kind of, I would say, a broad progressive Judaism, is blossoming in Jerusalem. So there's a community center in the neighborhood of Baka, which is where my children went to school in that neighborhood. And there's a large courtyard that sits in front of the community center. On Shabbat, there are 2 congregations that meet on either side of the courtyard. On one side is a congregation called Tzion, which is led by an Israeli rabbi ordained through Schechter, which is the conservative movement's seminary. And that congregation calls itself Kila Eretz Yisraelit, an Israeli congregation. And it's Davka, because they don't want to be, which means like it's emphatic. It doesn't want to be North American. They really want to have an Israeli progressive identity. It's an amazing congregation. If you go to Jerusalem, I highly recommend it. They have beautiful singing. And every time we went, the place was packed. We went there for Purim, and people were literally hanging into the windows to be able to hear the Megillah being read. And then on the other side of the courtyard, there is a congregation, the Minyan Shivyoni Baka, the egalitarian Minyan of Baka. And here in this congregation, men and women have equal opportunities for leading prayer, for reading Torah, having aliyot, for giving divrei Torah. And there is a mechitza, there is a divider between men and women. It's very low, and they keep moving it back and forth for various times when the halacha allows, when the Jewish law allows it to go. And look, I'd rather be in a congregation where men and women sit together, but I was very impressed by this congregation because they were really trying to find ways within a halachic framework to allow their progressive identity, their feminism, to work together to create some sort of a balance. And on Shabbat mornings, after the services would end at these two congregations, people would all gather together in this courtyard in the middle. And there were 400, maybe 500 people that would be gathering for the Kiddush after Shabbat. Almost all Israeli, many, many young families. And it was incredible to see that there was so much life to what I would call broadly progressive Judaism in Jerusalem. We had dinner with a colleague of Greg's who just moved to a new neighborhood, and they didn't have a shivyonia, an egalitarian minyan, in their new neighborhood, but they had one in their old neighborhood, and they decided that they wanted to be able to have something like that where they had moved. So they put up some flyers around in the grocery store around their neighborhood, and for the first Shabbat, 200 people showed up. So progressive Judaism is spreading like wildfire in Israel. It's not going to look like this, I don't think. It's not going to look like North American Reform Conservative Judaism, but that's okay. It's really good for the Jewish people, I think, and for us especially, as progressive diaspora Jews, that this is happening. And as much as we can support this effort while actually staying out of it, so much the better. Now, before we left on Sunday, it's hard to believe that we've only been here less than a week, we had to decide what were we going to do on our last day in Jerusalem. And it came very quickly that the most important place that I wanted to go and revisit was the Shuk, the market in Machane Yehuda. It's my favorite place in Jerusalem. I've always loved the Shuk, but it's really incredible how it has changed so much in the past, certainly 5 years, maybe 10 years. When Tel Aviv friends say that Jerusalem has no nightlife or fun, they have not obviously been to the Shuk at night. So when night descends and the produce sellers and the fishmongers close down for the day, the Shuk transforms into an entirely different place. It is so uniquely Jerusalem, and I want to close by just painting a picture of nighttime in the Shuk. Actually, painting a picture is an apt metaphor, because the first thing that strikes you at night in the Shuk is paint. So this is a very new thing. When the shutters come down in Jerusalem, you will see the most beautiful and colorful faces all around you. There's a very young street artist, a 22-year-old named Solomon Souza, who has been painting street art graffiti all over Jerusalem. And he started to paint with another friend the shutters in the Shuk. I think he's done 85 so far. There are over 300 in the Shuk. He spray paints on each one of the shutters a different face, a different person from Jewish history. Famous contemporary figures, historical figures, their faces gaze at you as you walk through the market, and you're amazed to find art, usually in a place where you'll find piles of fruit and nuts and spices. It's one of the most incredible Jewish art galleries I've ever encountered. And if you haven't seen it, I would actually recommend Googling graffiti in the Shuk just to see all these pictures. And when the shutters come down, the tables come out. There are dozens and dozens of restaurants and bars that are operating in the Shuk, and they have permission to put their tables right in the middle of the street where the shuk usually is full of people. And it feels like an incredible outdoor cafe. The two best meals that Greg and I had in Jerusalem, hands down, were in the shuk. One night of the CCAR conference, I walked with two of my friends and colleagues to the shuk to look at the nightlife so they could see the shutters. And when we got there, there was an enormous dance party going on. It happened to be Purim Katan, Little Purim, which is the miniature Purim that happens when there's a Jewish leap year. So this year we had 2 months of Adar. Purim then goes to Adar Bet, the second Adar, but during Adar Aleph, when it's the 14th of Adar, there's a little mini celebration. This was not mini at all. It was huge. There were hundreds of people in the streets dancing in the aisles of the shuk, and I was so struck by how diverse the crowd was. Religious, secular, Haredi, young, old, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Taimani, everyone was there at this party in the shuk. And the shuk, really that night, and every time we went there, just makes me feel proud of who we are as a people. There is a spirit there that is so incredible. There are Jews of all backgrounds creating, dancing, singing, tasting, smiling. Sometimes when we're here living in Vancouver, other places of the Jewish world, we can feel a bit small and isolated. But when we feel that connection to Jerusalem, we are reminded that we are strong and full of life. That our 22-year-olds are helping to create new ways of encountering Judaism. That our city of Jerusalem is not stuck in the past, but that it is transforming the future. Of that we can be very proud and feel very connected. So thank you again so much for this opportunity. I look forward to sharing so much of my experience as we continue forward. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. So we will continue now with the conclusion of our service, Aleinu, page 586. Please rise.